In this final video, I will be commenting on what I take to be the novel's most important features. For all its appearance as a simple comedy with little literary ambition, there is enough going on beneath the surface to warrant a closer look. Of course, the portrayal of this little town in provincial Russia is unrelentingly negative, and the humor on offer has an acerbic bite. There are few characters here worth admiring. We might sympathize with Zina more than any of the other central characters, at least while she is 23. But in the little epilogue where she is years older, it is hard to admire the woman she has become. Vasya, the schoolteacher, doesn't suffer from the same taint of low-minded pettiness that characterizes Mordassov in general, but his decisions in the backstory are egoistic and fatuous, and eventually he robs his mother of her son through an idiotic and romantically inspired suicide. One can't help but feel sorry for the prince throughout the story, but quite apart from his innocent senility, his appearances on the stage testify to a life squandered on foolishness and to an insensitivity to the suffering of the lower classes. The society ladies, of course, are simply impossible. Even our narrator, striking up his satirical tone, does little to inspire virtue. But perhaps the clearest exemplars of vice in the novel are Mozgliakov on the one hand and Marya Alexandrovna on the other. Both of these figures are selfish and shallow. Both of them are obsessed with social advantage, and both of them use Zina's beauty as a pawn for personal gain, a trophy bride for the hopeful suitor, or a tool for wealth and status for the manipulative mother. As a comment on an earlier video put it, Marya Alexandrovna is a real monster, not only a vicious person, but armed with both cunning and the audacity to employ it. In fact, as I read the story, its most admirable figure is a person who never enters the stage and is universally scorned by the figures who do. Stepanida Matveyevna, the prince's caretaker, who diligently provides for him a happy and peaceable retirement in his dotage, and protects him from the vultures eagerly surrounding him. It is a nice touch of irony when Marya Alexandrovna predicts the prince's imminent death in Chapter 4, on the grounds that Stepanida Matveyevna would hasten his demise. She is only half right, and in a way she does not expect, for of course it is she, and not her opponent, who becomes the prince's inadvertent killer. All this cynical depiction of Mordassov society is wrapped up throughout with a multi-layered criticism of the Romanticism of the prior generation. The prince, of course, is a relic of a prior age, an age when Romanticism was in full bloom, and an age that was very much in its sunset years, with a change of the Tsar, an approaching change in the status of the peasantry, and a change in the cultural and political opinions of the intelligentsia. In fact, I think we can learn something about the development of Dostoevsky as a writer through his years of imprisonment and exile by putting Uncle's Dream, a work of the late 1850s, side by side with two short stories of the late 1840s, White Nights and A Little Hero. Romanticism is very much a part of those tales as well, but with a different flavor. A Little Hero involves the reminiscences of a childhood holiday on a country estate among upper-crust gentry. It is loaded with romantic imagery and references, but has none of the cynicism. White Nights is the tale of a romantic dreamer who spends his evenings immersed in the reveries of his imagined narratives. The story offers a clear recognition that this kind of life is dangerously isolating, and yet it is also acknowledged to be charmingly seductive. Here, in Uncle's Dream, romantic ideals provide fodder for continual satire. When Marya Alexandrovna offers her arguments with Zina, with the prince, and with Mozgliakov, in each case she does so by leveraging romantic images. Zina will forgive her beloved Vasya under the azure exotic sky of Malaga, where he may die blissfully in her arms. The prince can reinvigorate the amorous chivalry of the court of Louis XIV. Mozgliakov will impress his beloved Zina by his melancholy, cultivated pose at a ball of the highest society, and so on. Even Afanasy Matveyevich is coached on how to appear like a romantic hero. In none of these cases are we expected to take the argument seriously. Of course, in Mozgliakov's case, we actually get to see Marya Alexandrovna's image put to the test in the little epilogue. As noted earlier, the ball scene is really a reference to Pushkin's narrative poem, Evgeny Onegin, and the way it plays out in the final pages serves to parody that source material. Pushkin's hero succeeds in stirring the passions of his beloved. All Mozgliakov gets in return is stiffness and an empty stomach. Reality will have its way, romantic notions be darned. And of course there is the other young suitor, who has his own collision with reality in that thematically important, if stylistically awkward, last chapter. Of course, he is the one who introduces Zina to that cursed Shakespeare, and while it would be a stretch to call Shakespeare a romantic author, we can easily see how the disillusionment of Hamlet or the dual suicides of Romeo and Juliet could be folded into the romantic overtones of Byron or Goethe. Vasya fits this mold himself. He feels disdain for the world around him while fantasizing of penning the perfect poem. He describes himself as a dreamer, rather like the protagonist of White Nights. And, like young Werther of Goethe's novel, reacts to his bad luck in love with a suicide, if an unusual form of it. On his deathbed, all this seems to be exposed as folly. His grand artistic plans never materialize. There is nothing at all glamorous about his death, and he is left with nothing but regret. In fact, he notes one source of regret that had already been anticipated in White Nights: isolation from the rest of the world, which has prevented him from ever really living. All this might suggest that in Uncle's Dream, Dostoevsky is turning his back on Romanticism once and for all. But of course things are never so simple with this author. If we consider the kinds of arguments that Marya Alexandrovna musters in her first interview with Zina in Chapter 5, we see her leverage a number of ideas, including the nobility of Christian self-sacrifice. This is not an ideal that Dostoevsky would ever disparage himself. He would go through life valuing it. Rather, we are witnessing Marya Alexandrovna abuse it in sophistry. Similarly, she is obviously abusing romantic values. What we are witnessing in Uncle's Dream is not really an abandonment of the romantic instinct, the love of the beautiful, the supernatural, the sublime. He will have that instinct for the rest of his days, an instinct that will set him apart from his nihilistic opponents. Rather, we are witnessing an exploration of its abuses. This will prove to be part of Dostoevsky's M.O. going forward. There is no idea he considers which escapes literary judgment and criticism, including ideas that are near and dear to his heart. And his judgment will so often concern the collision of ideas with reality. The amoralism of Raskolnikov meets its reckoning in Crime and Punishment, just as the piety of Alyosha collides with the stinking body of Father Zosima in Brothers Karamazov. Dostoevsky is ruthless both with the ideas he hates and the ones he loves. I think we may be seeing a hint of this new tendency here, a tendency which will come to be one of Dostoevsky's most distinguishing features. Of course, one of the greatest dangers of Romanticism is the way in which it might fail to account for the real particular concerns of the material world, such as the poverty of Vasya's household, or the emptiness of Mozgliakov's stomach in the final scene. This was, in fact, the dominant complaint against Romanticism in Russia at the time. And of course, empty ideas can be manipulated and abused in all kinds of ways to serve the selfish aims of the speaker, as Maria Alexandrovna's duplicity reveals. In fact, I think the very last words of the novel bear out this concern. After his defeat at the ball, Mozgliakov wakes up contented, quote, with quite different thoughts in his mind, unquote. Thoughts, after all, are quite easy to replace. They are cheap and can be swapped out by the fickle-minded at a moment's notice to serve their purposes. Such is the danger of a naive romanticism. And naivete is precisely what Dostoevsky lost in those years of ordeal in the prison camp in Siberia, as we see in this seemingly unassuming little novel from the late 1850s. He wrote another little novel during this period, one which most critics seem to believe to be the better of the two. The Village of Stepanchikovo, sometimes called The Friend of the Family. After a bit of a break, I will be tackling that one next. But the current Let's Read is at an end. Per usual, if you find these comments to be inaccurate or incomplete, I welcome you to improve upon them in the comments section below. I thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the experience.